Hi everyone, welcome to another episode from Lean Product Meetup. At tonight's meetup we had Mike Belsito. Mike is co-founder of Product Collective, which puts on the awesome industry product management conference that started in Cleveland. They've done it 5 times in Cleveland. They've expanded to Ireland and done it twice there. I've spoken at their conferences in Cleveland and Ireland, so I've seen them personally. They're a lot of fun, great conferences. Anyway, he came out here today to talk about jobs to be done and share some advice on it. He applied jobs to be done to the industry conference to figure out how could he create more value for attendees. So he shared a lot of real-world examples and case studies, details about how he did the interview. He also shared some great resources on the scripts he used for his interview. And the delighter that they came up with was basically at their conference to have someone take notes. So it's interesting how he came to that conclusion. It wasn't obvious, but through the process of going through these jobs to be done interviews, it was great. I like jobs to be done theory a lot. Very consistent with the stuff that I share in my book, the Lean Product Playbook. So I think you'll enjoy it. We also had a lot of great questions at the end. So if you enjoy the video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel, and also sign up for notifications so that when the next speaker's video is published, you'll be notified. Thanks a lot.
All right, I am really excited to be here. Thank you all for having me. As Dan mentioned, I am from Cleveland, Ohio, so made the trip all the way out here to be with y'all tonight, and I'm excited for that. But yeah, I'm co-founder of Product Collective and organizer of industry, but Dan mentioned some of the other things I'm up to. Rocket Ship is a podcast that's existed before I joined it, but now I think we've done 350 plus episodes. I've been co-host of that for the last, I think, 3 years or so. And then, Case Western. I also write a magazine column now for The Pragmatic, which is a magazine put on by Pragmatic Marketing. And yeah, I enjoy writing. I have written a book in the past that is not related to product management. It's more on the seed capital side. But tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about some of my experience with jobs to be done. There we go. Sweet. Thank you, Dan. Oh. No worries. Awesome. Cool. So we're going to talk about jobs to be done, but before we do that, so if you ever go to productcollective.com, this is what you'll see. How many of you are members of Product Collective by chance? Anybody? A couple of people. Cool. Well, if you're not, it's free to join, and basically we have a newsletter that goes out every week. Around 20,000 product people get that every week. Dan alluded to what used to be called Product Lunch. We now call them industry interviews. They're live video Q&A chats, almost like a virtual fireside chat. So we do that on the first and third Wednesday of every month. But all the past ones are up on YouTube. They're also, if you just go to productcollective.com, you'll see them there. And then we also have a Slack channel. There's about 7,000 product people in the Slack channel that every day just trading ideas and best practices. So I would love it if all of you would consider signing up. You just go to productcollective.com, enter your email, and it's free to do that. And then the other thing, as Dan alluded to before, we put on this conference every year called Industry, which is a lot of fun. So this year we have Grammy and Academy Award-winning artist Cagan. We always, every year, well, at least the last couple years, we try to get somebody that's sort of like way far afield from product management, but to tell a story about, how maybe they're in the creative side of things or entertainment, and it's always a lot of fun. So Cagan will be doing a fireside chat, but there's 20 plus other product people that are presenting. Jason Fried of Basecamp is making a return. Nikita Miller of Trello. We have product leaders from Walmart, from Walt Disney Imagineering, even the Federal Reserve Bank. So we try to get a good mix. It's not necessarily always the same companies that you might see everywhere else. We try to feature some different people every now and then. So we have 2 editions of Industry. The global edition takes place in the fall in Cleveland every year, and then we have a European edition that takes place in Dublin, Ireland. So if y'all want to come to Dublin, Ireland and join us, you could check that out too. And actually, Dan is one of the few people that's spoken at both editions, both the Cleveland edition and the Dublin edition. So Dan is always welcome at Industry, that is for sure. And I had this in the slide, but as Dan mentioned, I arranged to have a pass given away. You don't need to do this necessarily. You're welcome to email me. This is my email, but you could send out a tweet and tag me in the Lean Product Meetup and all that, and we'll give away a pass to industry too. But I'm not here to talk about industry the whole time. I'm really here to dig in on jobs to be done. And how many people have used jobs to be done in some way yet? Awesome. So I have a little bit too, but I would say that for a lot of people, and this was the case for me, at first I found it to be pretty intimidating. And mostly, not because it's so overly complicated, but it's almost like there's different information that's out there, and it's almost hard to understand, well, what should I be looking at? How do we really actually put this all to use? And at least that's what I was experiencing way back when. And I remember, for me, once I realized that it doesn't actually have to be so complicated, you don't have to overcomplicate things, you don't have to think, gosh, I have to be an expert at this to start to actually put it to use. That's when we actually saw some value come out of it. This whole time before, I was sort of crippled with this fear of even dipping my toes in, because I'm like, I don't really know how to do it. I'm not an expert at this. So many people are smarter at jobs to be done than me, and I've heard the milkshake thing. I don't really know what all that means. So I never even tried it. And then once I started sort of just erasing this and just thinking, you know what, I'm not going to let the fact that it seems complicated get in the way of just dipping my toes in and trying. We actually saw some value out of jobs to be done, and that's what I want to talk about. I will say there are definitely experts at jobs to be done that are out there. Dan mentioned Tony Ulwick is one of them, so it's on the far right. There's Clayton Christensen, Bob Nesta. A lot of these people are known as like the early pioneers of jobs to be done, and these people, they're very smart, and they came up with all these sort of theories and concepts that are now getting put into practice, and that's awesome. I can tell you right now, I'm not one of those experts. So this wasn't meant to be sort of this expert talk on all the things you'll need to know in jobs to be done. I'm just a product person. It used to be that for me, my product was software that I managed, just like most of you. Now my product happens to be a conference. I never thought I would be a conference organizer, but that's sort of how life played out for me. But I still, because I'm a product person at heart, I treat the conference like a product. I try to think of the conference the same way that I thought of the software I was managing, a few years back. So I'm not giving this talk as one of those experts. I'm giving this talk as somebody that again was sort of afraid of even trying jobs to be done. But once I got past that fear, started dipping my toes in, I realized I can actually put this in practice pretty quickly too. So know that that's where this talk is coming from. In fact, I should set some expectations right from the get-go, because I think it's important. I want you all to get a lot of value out of tonight. Hopefully you're going to leave with some things that might actually help you put some things into practice. But let me tell you what tonight's not about. Tonight is not about a master class that I'm going to give you. Mentioned that before. I'm not an expert, so I can't give you that master class, right? We're also not going to dip into the heavy on the theoretical concepts of jobs to be done. I think it's great to understand that there's a lot of people that are totally into that. Working at Case Western as a professor, I have a lot of friends that are full-time faculty there, and that would be their dream. Just dig into the theoretical aspects of it for the next year and just sort of play that out. That's not me though. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I want to put some of this stuff to practice. So we'll talk a little bit, just very basic concepts, especially for those of you that haven't really dipped your toes in the water yet. But I'm going to try to not spend too much time on that. I want to spend the time on how we actually put it into practice, and I might give you some ideas on how you might be able to put it into practice pretty quickly too. The other thing that this talk is not about is uncovering any sort of silver bullet that's out there. There is no silver bullet. If anybody's looking for that silver bullet, first of all, email me and let me know what it is, and then because I want that too for me. But the truth is there is no silver bullet. Jobs to be done is not a silver bullet. I've seen it's funny because jobs to be done, there's super fans of it. There's people like Jason Fried at Basecamp and Des Traynor of Intercom, and they believe in jobs to be done and use it, and it works really well for them. But then there's also critics of jobs to be done, and I've heard some of the criticism is there's no true one way. I think it was Jared Spool on Twitter I saw one time where he's there's jobs to be done is not the one true way, and it's well, no, nothing is the one true way, right? So that's not what tonight's all about. It's not a silver bullet. I mean, Jared Spool's right on that. It's not the one true way. But I don't think, just because that's not what tonight's all about, that doesn't mean, hopefully, we won't get value out of this. But again, expectations-wise, what is tonight about? Well, tonight, the focus is on how do you get started with it? Again, if you're at that very beginning stage, you don't even need to understand like the whole full like theoretical frameworks of it. It's just, let's understand the basic concepts and let's start just trying some things. And once you start trying things, I think you'll see how you might be able to use it for you. That's why a lot of what tonight will be, it's sort of action oriented. Like I always have a bias to like, let's just do stuff. Let's try stuff. So my hope is that some of the examples we'll go over today will show you how you might be able to put it into action. And they are real world examples. So I think all of the examples are really, it's either things that I've experienced myself or that I've seen. Again, for those of you that are familiar with jobs, sometimes you hear the milkshake example a lot. That's cool. I don't even know all about the milkshake. I think it's kind of played out, right? So, and I don't have that like personal experience with, I'm not a huge milkshake guy anyway, right? So I don't want to talk about milkshakes. I want to talk about examples that I've actually gone through myself as we've sort of tried this out. So that is what tonight's all about. I think the advantage of going with real world examples that I'm familiar with is I'm actually going to give you some things that you might be able to use, might be of value to you. So I kind of have it, that's my delighter for the presentation. At the end, you'll see some stuff that you could download, scripts, recordings, things like that. So you will see that a bit later on. But to get started, I do think it's important, even though we're not going to go heavy into the theoretical frameworks, it's still important to understand like what is the basic concept of jobs to be done first. And so if we're thinking about the basic concept, at the end of the day, it's a framework just to understand why and how people buy our products. That's at the core, that's what it's all about. It's meant to be sort of customer-centric, especially problem-centric. So if you're familiar with other forms of, or other philosophies of product that seem, customer-centric, problem-centric, some of these concepts are going to be familiar to you. It might feel like, you might see some things be like, yeah, but isn't that, this other framework I'm already using? It might be very similar, right? That's why, I think it doesn't have to be so complicated. But that, at the core, that's really what it's all about. And it's on the premise that, and this is why they call it the jobs to be done, that people aren't buying products simply because of features. It's not that, the phone I have that's up here is, has a million different features in it and that's why I bought it. In fact, I can tell you specifically why I bought this phone in the beginning. It had nothing to do with features. It had to do with the fact that I could start to test out at the time what I thought was virtual reality, right? And it wasn't true virtual reality, Samsung Gear VR. I'm just kind of a geek that way. Like that was I wanted to be able to experience that. So that's why I bought this to begin with. But the thing is, products aren't about the individual features. It's really that people have a problem and they're hiring a specific product to solve that problem. That's the core of jobs to be done. So when we talk about, well, what job is that product actually doing? That's what we mean by that. There's a problem that somebody's experiencing, and now we can basically solve for that problem with a product. The circumstances and the context matters a whole lot. Later on, one of the examples I'm going to give, it's going to show like, well, gosh, the features might seem pretty similar there, but depending on the situation, two products that might seem like they compete with each other might actually not compete with each other at all. But again, it's about the circumstances and the context. And then, there are individual components of jobs to be done, sort of terminology that you'll hear often when you're talking about jobs to be done, and it's things like struggling moments, the pushes and the pulls, anxieties and the inertia. This is all a part of jobs to be done, and we'll talk about what each of those individual things actually means. But it's important to note here, because then all of the other pieces of jobs to be done, the interviews that we'll do, which that's one of the core elements, it's all about finding those things, finding the struggling moments, finding the pushes and the pulls. And so, even though an interview is one of the major components of jobs to be done, specifically, say a jobs to be done interview, it's very similar to what you might already be doing right now, right? With just user interviews. I remember I did attendee interviews. We did dozens of attendee interviews before we ever started even trying our hand at jobs to be done. But I can tell you those interviews aren't necessarily, well, not anything like what we're doing now with attendees, because we're after certain things that I thought I might have been getting after before, but now understanding that, okay, I'm trying to identify what is this struggling moment? What are the pushes and the pulls? So you might conduct the interview, same sort of way, like you're setting up time and you have a script that you're going to go through. But the point is you're going to try to uncover those struggling moments, the pushes, pulls, anxieties, and the inertia. So you have your jobs to be done interview. And then I've mentioned struggling moments a few times. Well, what does that mean? It kind of means what it sounds like it might mean. What it actually is it's the root cause of what leads somebody to trying to find a better solution. So if you could just think of, kind of any new product that you've used, well, what led you to actually use that product? Well, it solved a problem for you. What was that problem? What was that struggle that you were experiencing? That's what we're trying to find that's really what we mean by struggling moments. And that's what we're trying to find every time we do go through a jobs to be done interview, let's say. So struggling moments are specific, and it's that pain that leads to an action, which might be finding your product and hiring your product to complete that job. It might also mean firing your product. That struggling moment can lead them to your product, but it also might be what takes them away from your product and it leads them to hire another product for another reason. So you can conduct those interviews that I mentioned before, either with people that have just purchased your product or people that are, customers that have left you. They've gone on to use a different solution altogether. And then, I mentioned the pushes and the pulls and anxiety and inertia. What does that all mean? I will, and Dan had shared this with me. There's actually an awesome diagram, and actually, if you all email me, I'm happy to share it with you. That Ash Moria, who's another proponent of jobs to be done, he created, and I didn't get it into this presentation, but it'll be helpful for you after the fact. But I want to at least walk through this sort of almost like a timeline, if you will, for what leads somebody from the status quo to a new solution. Now, status quo, actually, before I do that, I'll just kind of explain it generally. So status quo is really, what is life like today? If you are experiencing a problem, think of it in the context of this problem that you have. What is life like for you? And the push is actually the moment where you're saying, you know what? I can't live like this anymore. There's got to be a better way. I don't know if you've ever seen those infomercials where they're like, there's got to be a better way. Where they act like you can't pour milk in a cereal bowl or something like that. But that's kind of like the push. The push is that realization that I can't live like this anymore, and there has to be a better way. I cannot live with this problem anymore. So that's the initial push. The pull is now you're past the point where you've made the decision there's got to be a better way, but now there's a new solution that's sort of in sight and you're being pulled to it. It's when you hear of that solution and all of a sudden there might be some allure there to a new solution until ultimately you get to that new solution. You actually hire that product to do the job that it needs to do to solve your problem. So pushes and pulls, that's how we get to the new solution. And I'm going to give you an example. This is back when a conference wasn't my product, and instead I was in software. So I was at a company, it was a ticketing technology company, sort of like a Ticketmaster competitor, and there were probably about 100 of us in the company. But we had the same problem, probably that everybody here experienced way back when, a few years back, which is like, gosh, we're buried. The status quo is we're buried in emails. We've got all these meetings that are happening, particularly those of you, once you get to that sort of 100 people in a company, in a product role, you're pulled into all sorts of meetings. I felt that. Communication dysfunction. And so this was what life was like for a lot of people. And then, and everybody's saying like, this sucks, like, let's have no meeting Friday. But then you have to have a meeting, or the CEO wants to meet with you, and all of a sudden they're breaking that rule. And it's like, all right, well, what do we do? Well, and then all of a sudden, by the way, so the push here in this case would be like, I keep taking one step forward, two steps back. the emails, meetings, nonstop. Like, I can't live like this. There's got to be a better way, right? So that's what's pushing me away from the status quo. But then the pull, we hear about this new app called Slack, right? This is obviously a few years back. And you hear people talking about how like Slack is killing emails, and I don't know about you, I still get a lot of emails, so it's not like Slack really killed emails. But that was the allure. That was the pull. We start hearing like, well, wait a minute, we don't have to get emails like how's okay? Like that sounds really nice. There's not as many meetings anymore. That's interesting. I don't like sitting through 20 meetings a day. That might be cool. That's the pull. We hear about the solution, and it's starting to pull to actually get there. So I'm in this company, 100 people. I'm hearing about these solutions. I'm thinking there's got to be a better way. So what happens next? I bring the whole 100-person company to Slack instantly, right? Well, no, it doesn't necessarily work like that, right? I mentioned the anxieties and the inertia that happen. So anxieties and inertia is sort of what, before we get to that new solution, what pulls us back. So an anxiety would be, well, okay, wait a minute, all right. And maybe this is coming from the CEO. Maybe this is like, before I even present it to the CEO, I'm feeling this, like, okay, so our entire team is just gonna be in a like chat room in this app all day? Like, well, wait, is that really gonna help productivity? I'm not so sure about this anymore. So this is, now all of a sudden, I found this new solution. It seems like life could be better with this new solution, but I'm starting to feel this anxiety about actually making the leap. These are important to find, because if we're gonna find anxieties about our own product, like we need to know how to help people get past that anxiety and get to the new solution. And inertia just stops us in the tracks altogether. If you get to the inertia part, it's pretty hard to get a customer to make it past this, because this is like, all right, wait, I just can't see our team getting into this. Never mind. Maybe just living with emails and meetings is just fine. So when we think about the core elements of jobs to be done, again, starts with that status quo. The pushes and the pulls get us to the new solution, but the anxieties and the inertia, that's what keeps us back. That's what keeps us from actually hiring this new product to do the job in the first place. So what does this all mean, right? Because I promised you we weren't going to talk about theoretics like too much here, and we're not. Like this is, that's sort of the basics. I want to get into how we started. Like once I started understanding all this, how we started putting some things into action. I didn't even realize I was going to do that. Cool, thank you, Terry. So I do want to look at a real life example, but it's actually not going to do with software. It's going to do with pizza. And the reason is I like pizza a whole lot. And so I'm lucky that in Lakewood, Ohio, how many people have been to Cleveland, by the way? All right, oh, that's a lot more than I thought. All right, nice. By the way, Cleveland I feel like is a delighter of industries. A lot of times people have never been to Cleveland and they come and they're like, well, this place is actually cool. A lot of good places to eat and drink and all that. So in my little town of Lakewood, which is a suburb just west of Cleveland, there's like 15 places to get pizza. Some of them are better than others. Here's 3 of them in particular. There's Harlow's, which is sort of like a very small, like wood-fired pizza bistro. It's BYOB and really cool atmosphere. Little Caesars is one of them. Little Caesars, just a chain pizza place, just like Pizza Hut, Papa John's, those kind of places. And there's Angelo's. Angelo's is like a Lakewood staple. Like if you were to be in another part of Cleveland and you're like, hey, let's go to Lakewood and get pizza. A lot of people would think Angelo's right away. That's sort of like it's just like a local staple. So competition is pretty tough in Lakewood for pizza. That's just 3 of the places, but there's like I said, 10, 15 places. So let me ask you a question. How many people would think that, for me, Harlow's would be the place to go of the 3? Let's just limit it to the 3. How many people think Harlow's? Okay. How many people think Little Caesars? How many people think Angelo's? Okay. All right, cool. Team Angelo's. I will tell them you said that. So let's see. Who does win out? It's not so easy. So I will say Harlow's wins, but only when I'm looking for like an intimate date night kind of thing with my wife. I have 2 young kids, been married 11 years. Like, we don't get out too often, right? So if I'm trying to find date night, Harlow's might be a great place because it's got this intimate atmosphere here. So when I'm looking for date night, I would say Harlow's would win of those 3. But the thing is, it's not really competing against Little Caesars and Angelo's. I mean, maybe Angelo's a little bit. It might be competing though more with Western Reserve Distillery, which is a local distillery right in Lakewood, really cool vibe, great date night place. Now, Little Caesars, I will tell you, Little Caesars sometimes wins out. We go to Little Caesars a decent amount. But it's only when it's a situation like we're rushing home from soccer practice. Like my 6-year-old son might have soccer. Soccer goes till 7:30 at night. I'm trying to get them into bed by 8:30, which never happens. But so I want dinner that's quick, like nobody's gonna complain about it. It's not horrible, not completely horrible. Little Caesars might win out there, but it's not gonna compete with Harlow's. It's gonna compete with like a place like McDonald's, which I'm ashamed to say, but sometimes McDonald's might be the choice because they have good Happy Meal toys and I just want my kids to go to bed. So anyway, in that situation, again, McDonald's is the competition. Angelo's wins a lot with me, but especially when we're having friends over. Maybe they live in another part of Cleveland. If we're having those friends over and sort of like we're ordering food in, again, they want a taste of Lakewood. And so to them, like Angelo's, like that's exciting for them. But it's not going to win out over, we're not competing with Little Caesars in that case. But it's more like Melt. Melt's a sort of, it's a not, well now it's kind of a chain, but it's very local. It was on like the Man vs. Food, you know, they had a Melt grilled cheese challenge. If you ever saw that, that was like my hometown, that's Lakewood. So a lot of times when friends come and visit, like they're like, oh yeah, Angelo's or Melt. So the thing is, that's what I mean by context matters. They all have the same, you know, features in a way, right? It's like it's pizza dough and it's cheese, but like Little Caesars, it's not that they have the freshest ingredients or that they have the, you know, the best ingredients or anything like that. It's just situational. In that situation where I'm trying to rush home from soccer practice, it's a inexpensive and, you know, kind of painless way to go bring dinner home. In each of those cases, like we're hiring that product to do a specific job. The job isn't just to get fed, to consume pizza. It's the date night. It's the rushing home from soccer. It's the, you know, having a good dinner with friends that are visiting from out of town. That's the context that I'm talking about. So why does it all matter? Like, okay, I get it. Like, pizza places are different. Like the fancy pizza place maybe doesn't compete with Little Caesars. Well, it matters for all of us in the products that we manage for multiple ways. One might be better marketing. I mean, if we know the reasons why our customers are hiring our product, we know that the problem that it's actually solving for, we might market to them differently. Little Caesars shouldn't be marketing themselves as like the best ingredients in the world. To me, it would make a lot more sense if they were marketing it as like fast, efficient, and, you know, be home and fed in 30 minutes. Like that's what's speaking to me as a dad with young kids. It might help us uncover new products and features to launch. Later on in this presentation, I'm going to tell you about the biggest delighter that we've ever launched with industry, and it's because we uncovered this going through this process. It might also mean new channels that we might find, new sales channels for our product. So maybe as product people, you know, that might be something we're intimately involved in. Even if it's not, I could guarantee if we find new channels for our company to start selling through, everybody's going to be happy. So again, it's the more that we can understand why and how people are buying our products, the better we can market to them. The better products and features we can launch, and then better. Or the more able we will be to launch new channels, launch through new channels. So I'll stop talking about pizza because even though I already ate, I'm getting hungry again. But I'll talk about industry because I remember when we were at, I think it was Industry 2017, which actually was the year that Dan came and spoke at Industry for the first time. And I'm backstage and I'm talking with one of those Jobs to be Done experts you saw on the screen earlier, Bob Nesta. And I remember telling him, like, yeah, we do attendee interviews all the time. I'm like, but I don't even want to call them Jobs to be Done interviews because they're definitely not Jobs to be Done interviews. I don't know how to do that. And Bob, how many people met Bob before? This really interesting guy, and really like gracious guy too. And he's like, well, I'm curious, why? And I'm like, I don't know. It just seemed complicated to me. Like there's a lot of stuff out there. I don't really know. Like I haven't taken the time to study it. He's like, well, why don't you just try, like the interviews you're talking about, like why, like what's confusing about it? I'm like, I just don't know. Like, I just kind of feel like I haven't been able to decipher what everything means. He's like, well, why don't I help you? Like, I'll sit down, we'll do some interviews together. And here's the thing, like, Bob charges companies a lot of money to do stuff like that. I know that. So anytime Bob's gonna make an offer like that, definitely take him up on it. And the thing is about Bob, he has an interesting career. He interned for Dr. Deming back in the day. Dr. Deming's the guy that came up with like the whole total quality management. I don't know if any, probably remember it from business school. I remember reading about it in business school. Then I'm like, I'm glad I'll never have to read about stuff like this again. But Bob like interned for Dr. Deming. Bob back in the day was an engineer for Ford. And actually, you probably use one of his features, I guess I'll say. So if you're driving, has anybody ever had the problem of like when you pull in the gas station not realizing what side the gas is on? In every car, there's like an arrow that points. And I never knew, I remember when I first learned of that, I'm like, well, not in my car. Bob's like, yeah, no, in your car, everybody's car. And there is, sure enough, there's this arrow there, and my mind was kind of blown. Supposedly, Bob helped sort of introduce that, which is now in all different cars. And now Bob's the president of the Rewired Group, was an early pioneer in sort of the whole jobs be done movement, and he's been a speaker and workshop facilitator at industry. He actually is giving 2 jobs be done workshops that are almost sold out at this upcoming industry. But so Bob has a really interesting career, and he's a smart guy, right? He's like a lot smarter than me probably. So I'm like, all right, Bob, I will take you up on this offer. And so Bob started helping us like interview people. But first, before we got to that, we had to come up with a plan. We had to first come up with hypotheses on why are attendees buying our product, which in our case it's our conference. Why are they buying a ticket to industry? We had to then create an interview script to sort of validate or invalidate those hypotheses. So we had to come up with those, and then the questions are based on that. Like we're trying to, and it's okay if it's invalidated, it's just we need to know one way or the other. And then we had to find people to interview. The thing is, it's just 3 to 5 attendees. That's all we were really after. We wanted to interview 3, but it's like, maybe you find 5, and then a couple people end up canceling, and you get to 3. But it doesn't have to be 10, doesn't need to be 20, doesn't need to be 50. Even with 3, you could start to see some patterns emerge. Really what we're after though is trying to discover those struggling moments. And the pushes and pulls and anxieties and all that too, but those struggling moments, that's sort of like the source of innovation. If we can understand that, we might be able to understand how we could better solve those problems. And then the whole point, and I mentioned this to Bob early on, I'm like, well, that though, again, with jobs, like, there's all these books on it, like, I just want to do stuff. He's like, no, you will be able to put it all into action. You could do all this, starting from day 0 to then 60 days from now, we'll do all this, all of these steps. We'll create the hypotheses, create an interview script, find the people. And it probably didn't even take 60 days. It was probably, but 60 days is when we actually had like real results. Like not just we conducted the interviews, but we actually did stuff with it. It just took 60 days. So those hypotheses on why people buy. So originally, we came up with these 3 things. We're like, okay, well, why would people come to industry specifically? Well, they want to learn from the best product people, right? Like people like Dan are coming. Who would want to learn from Dan? So that's one reason. Making connections, like, okay, like there's 1,000 other product people in the room. That is probably one reason why people are coming. We do these attendee interviews. They say that's why they're coming. And then finding inspiration. And we would literally like say things like this in our marketing. We'd say like, find inspiration to build better products. So these were our hypotheses. Then we created the script. And with the script, like the things that we were after is we wanted to understand the backstory. So we're not just like starting with, okay, so when did you buy your ticket? It's like, oh, let's rewind. Like, who is this person? Like personally too, like are they married? Do they have kids? Like that stuff actually matters. We wanted to know that. Again, we're going to validate or invalidate the hypotheses. We want to find the moment of intent. One was that specific situation where they said, you know what, I'm going to hire this product to solve the problem. I'm going to buy the ticket to industry because there is this need that I have. But when was that exact moment when it happened with them? And then again, identify those pushes, pulls, and struggling moments. So we scheduled the interviews. Again, sort of scheduled 5, hope for 3. Each interview, we allot 120 minutes. And this, I remember when I was explaining to Bob like how I did attendee interviews in the past, I'm like, we schedule them at 20 to 30 minutes, like everybody's busy, so I don't want to take too much time out of their day. He's like, that's not enough. Like 20 minutes, multiply that by 3. You need a full hour of their time, and people will give it to you. Like if they're genuinely interested in helping you, they will give that to you. But you have to have 30 minutes of prep and then 30 minutes of post, 30-minute review to really understand things. So that 60 minutes, there's a reason why it has to be that long. We'll talk about that. And what I would say is either record these or have a +1, or both, right? So maybe you have somebody that's on with you taking notes. We recorded them, and I was that +1. Bob was really the one doing the interviews in these cases. But it's helpful, even if you are recording them, to have somebody with you living in the moment hearing this, because then when you do that review, there's going to be things that you're hearing that person doesn't hear. And even if it is recorded, if somebody listens, even if it's later in the day, it's just not as fresh for you than having gone right through it. So I think it's great if you do both. And the only, again, in terms of types of customers, all we try to do, the only rule is just sort of avoid outlier customers. So we have, a few different use cases of who might come to industry, but there's always like random people who I'm like, what? I don't want to ask them this, but I'm like, why did you even buy a ticket to come, So you don't ask those people to interview here. But as long as you're avoiding the outliers, really anybody else is fair game. And by Bob's direction, like we had to approach this almost like we're documentary filmmakers. Like that, the background is important to understand, but also digging into each detail, as getting as detailed as you can. So in our specific case, I'm going to call out one of the interviews we did with Bob in particular. There was Matt, and Matt was an onboarding lead at software as a service company, and he wanted to be more product focused. That was sort of like, if I were to explain Matt in sort of a nutshell, that would be Matt. And so when we first started talking with Matt, that's sort of all we had. But when I go back to this diagram on Matt, here was the situation. We started asking background questions like, what is the status quo for Matt? And really, we learned he's an onboarding lead. He's not really he's not a product manager, VP product, anything like that, but he's still a product person. He considers himself to be a product person, but he's an onboarding lead, and he wanted to level up on his product skills. So that's where he sits today. That's like when we first started talking to him, that's what we knew about Matt, and that's really all we knew at first. But the more we talk to him, the more we start to see what the push would be. So for Matt in this case, the push was Matt's boss really wanted him to own becoming more of a product person. So he felt external pressure that, yes, you're in this onboarding lead role now, but like the expectation is you need to keep moving up the ranks. And you said you wanted to be a product person, Matt, like you need to own that. And Matt wanted to too, so it wasn't just all external. It wasn't like he felt like, gosh, I'm being pressured to do something I don't want to do. Matt wanted to do it, but this was the push for him. This is where he realized, I can't just stand pat. I can't just sit here every day as just doing what I'm doing. Like I want to keep learning about product. I want to keep just defining myself as a product person more and more. The pull for Matt was, it ended up that Matt learned about industry on a podcast. I was a guest on, I think it was This is Product Management, it's a good podcast too. And he had been to other tech conferences that his company had been a part of just as attendees or sponsors. And in fact, there was the conference he went to the year before, because his company, we learned, they pay for one conference every year. And maybe for some people they get more, but there's like, as a rule, like you could go to one conference a year and your company's gonna pay for it. So the year before they went to like World Domination Summit, which is a pretty ambitious name. But some people say industry is ambitious. I'm like, man, World Domination Summit. But that's where they went as a team. So a lot of people in Matt's company went to that conference, and it turns out they go to that conference kind of fairly often. But he was enamored by the fact that there's a product conference out there. Like he didn't even know that there were any, Dan just showed like, whatever, dozens and dozens of product conferences. Matt didn't know any product conferences existed. So he heard about industry, and he's like, man, there's a thing called a product conference? Like that's pretty interesting. And then he started to do some research, but did he go right to the new solution? Not quite yet. There were some anxieties for Matt. So Matt, his big concern was just like, okay, but this is a new thing for my company. Like nobody's been to a product conference. This isn't, everybody goes to World Domination Summit. And actually, by the way, for them too, Matt, most of his team work remote. So a lot of people pick one conference, not everybody, but a lot of people, that's sort of like their team building. A lot of times, like that's the only time they might see each other in a year for some of his colleagues. So he was feeling a little bit of anxiety because it's like, well, gosh, if I choose a new conference or conference that's different than one everybody else is going to, like there's kind of higher stakes there. So that was one anxiety Matt was feeling. And he did, he explained, at one point, I just wasn't so sure because it might have just been easier to choose a conference everybody's familiar with because I'm going to have to prove my worth here more. And that would have been the inertia for Matt. But ultimately, he did come to industry. So there's a little bit of a celebration there, right? But we knew that. We knew he came to industry. That's why we interviewed him. But we learned something in that interview. And this is something that we wouldn't have known if we didn't dig in so much with Bob. And it was that Matt took some awesome notes. On the left, those are actually Matt's notes. He does sketch notes. So he's pretty talented. In this case, this is, Tibet Alpha Shawi. So he took these notes and he was tweeting them out, and they're really cool notes. But we started to ask, like, so why did you do that? I mean, so for some people, it's like they share this and it's like, well, because look how cool, like I want to sell this to other conferences, or just like, I'm building up my Twitter followers, like follow me and tag me. But it wasn't really about that. For Matt, it was like, well, the thing is like, this is how for me, I'm a visual person, and I felt real like more responsibility for this conference in particular to share with everybody what I learned. So when I go back to the office, like I wanted to share all these notes with everybody. We're like, okay, that's interesting. Like he didn't do this because he thinks everybody's going to think this is really cool. It's just he's a visual person, but he felt the need to have to prove its worth, to share the knowledge with the rest of the team. Which, by the way, that's a different job than it would be if he was trying to sell these sketch notes to other conferences or something. So it's kind of important to understand. And we wouldn't have really got to this point if Bob didn't press us to keep digging deep. In the interview, Bob cuts Matt off several times and say, wait a minute, but you just said something. Why did you just say that? Or well, I'm not familiar with that term that you used. Matt talked about leveling up his skills. Bob's like, I'm not familiar with the term level up, which I think Bob was familiar with that term level up. But he says, I'm not familiar with that term level up. What do you mean by that? So we wouldn't have known that if we didn't keep pressing and keep digging. And I think that's the reason why Bob says, got to be 60 minutes. Not that the pre-Bob interviews, the Mike Belsito interviews I was doing back to 20 to 30 minute interviews, I would have said level up your skills. Okay, cool. And then the next question, but Bob kept digging in. And as Dan likes to say, I know Dan shared this image with me. It was because you're really peeling the onion back. You're interviewing somebody and you're learning about something, but you got to keep peeling back to really get to the center, to get to understand sort of the total picture here. So after the interview, we have this whole interview with Matt. We prepped. We then reviewed the objectives. What were our objectives meeting up with Matt? Okay, let's look in our notes. What are the can we validate or invalidate what some of our assumptions were, and what are those struggling moments? So after not just Matt's interview, but 3 interviews, we started to see some common patterns sort of emerge. You might remember, again, originally we were thinking, these are the reasons people come to industry, learning from the best and making connections and finding inspiration. Here's the thing, that was all too generic. That was one thing we proved out, because you can use, yes, those things, these are true. People do come to industry for these things, but they're also going to go to Dreamforce for these things. They could go to, XYZ conference, World Domination Summit, any conference they could go for these things. So it's not enough. It's too generic. You have to get more specific. Okay, yeah, but why industry versus World Domination Summit? Why industry versus Mind the Product or Front or other product conferences that might exist? Because Matt, once he learned product conferences were a thing, he started digging into those other product conferences too. So the real patterns that we saw emerge was that people are really coming to industry, and this might be true with other product conferences, but compared to, let's just say, other general tech conferences, to answer the question, am I doing this right? Which, hopefully it resonates with some of you, but I know I didn't go to school for product management, because back in the day, you couldn't go to school for product management. Actually, the first product job that I had, I almost, looking back, it's almost like I was trying to talk them out of it. I'm like, this sounds cool, but I don't know if it's for me. I never went to school for product management. And they're like, oh no, Mike, that's not a thing. Like, people don't go to school for product management. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so anyway, that's really the question that when people come to industry, they're asking themselves. And then that level up on new skills, like actually one other person in another interview mentioned that term. And the actual term itself isn't as important as sort of like what it really means. It's sort of like, okay, I am a, I'd like to think I'm an A product manager, but how can I be an A plus product manager? Or how can I be the 10X product manager? So it's like, how can I keep leveling up? And then in terms of that struggling moment, it was proving its worth. That really stood out with Matt in particular, but we saw that in the other interviews that we were doing too. People kept feeling that. And actually, when I thought of it, it was like one of these things where it's like, how come I never really thought of this? Because when I look out at the sea of people speaking at industry, or like if I'm on stage at the sea of people attending industry, I see laptops out. Hopefully it's not just that they're doing work. I see people scribbling in notebooks, like people are taking notes. And so that was interesting. But it's only interesting if you're going to actually do something with it, if you actually take action. So for us, we're like, okay, well, what can we do? How can we take action on these things? Well, the first, and this might seem really, really simple, but we can start to change our marketing. So here now, this is kind of our website. It says level up your skills and enhance your career. And it might be sort of a subliminal thing, but it's like the more we could use the language that's actually in the mind of our customers, the better. So small thing, like I don't think us changing that bullet's going to make like a major. It's not like we changed that bullet and ticket sales went way up. But I'll tell you what also happened. We heard Matt loud and clear on the struggle of having to prove its worth, and it led us to create notes. What we do is we hire a journalist, a professional journalist, to come to every edition of Industry and take notes on each of the sessions. And when attendees leave, like before they even get home, because 90% of the people that come to Industry are flying into Ohio for it, before people even get back to their office, they have a really nicely put together ebook highlighting all the notes from Industry. So they don't have to actually take notes. They still can if they want to. But I remember when we workshopped this at the first European edition of Industry, I remember on stage saying, oh, and just so you know, I see some of you are taking notes. You can, but you don't have to. We hired Kevin, who's a local journalist here in Dublin, and he's going to take notes, and we're going to send them to you afterwards. Kevin got the biggest ovation more than any other speaker at Industry Europe that year. You saw like laptops close and just like people's shoulders relaxed. Like it was a big deal. And like that was a total like test for us. Like we weren't sure, because there's a cost to hire a journalist and bring them in and do something like that, but it made a huge difference. So yeah, so this is just sort of like a clip of some of the notes. And I will say that is the biggest delighter yet. Even now, I mean, we kind of went back and forth of, do we make this a delighter? Do we advertise it as a feature? Not quite sure what we'll do long term, but for now, we keep it as a delighter because it's a lot of new people at Industry each year. So it's always, I do it because it's fun to see people like yeah, So I want to keep those yeah moments. And so for right now, it's a delighter. But so what happened with Matt? So Matt came to Industry that first year. We do this interview with him. And we learned, we sort of made adjustments because of it. So what happened with Matt? Well, Matt actually hasn't come back to Industry quite yet. So 2017 was the last. So really, in fairness, there's only been one edition since then. Not everybody goes to the same conference every single year. But so Matt didn't come back last year. He still says he will come back, but we see tweets like this. When we again as the notes as an example, and it sort of doesn't matter if Matt comes back year and year. What matters is like people like Matt, if they're experiencing the same problem and we can better create Industry to be the job that solves that problem, the better off we'll be. And so when we see things like this and we see the feedback forms that come afterwards, it makes a big difference. And our attendance keeps climbing. It's not like I can say it's because we do the notes, that made the difference. That's why we're going to have 1,200 people here instead of 900 people. But again, the better we're able to solve our customers' problems, the better off we'll be. So we're pretty much towards the end of the presentation, but there are a few things that I just want everybody to sort of keep with them. Like if you're going to get anything out of tonight, it's really this. You don't need to be an expert to get started. In fact, I would actually say it's better off if you're not an expert. I think like the more curious you are, the more open you are about just getting in and trying some things and not worrying about having like every single detail ironed out, I think the better off you'll be, because chances are you're going to take action right away. I do think though, before you do get started, just be clear about what your objectives are. Like, what are you trying to get out of it? What are those core hypotheses you have about your own product? Understand that jobs to be done is not a silver bullet. Like, again, the criticism that it gets, like, it's not the end all be all. There's not one true, it's not the one true way. Nothing is the one true way. Like, who cares? It's a tool. It's a tool that the more we have experience with it, the more we could use this tool. But choose the right tools that work for you. This is one tool that you can start using. When you do those interviews, though, I would say really dig in, like uncomfortably dig in with people. Like when Bob was cutting Matt off several times, like the nice guy in me wanted to be like, oh, no, don't, just let Matt off the hook on that one. But I will say, like, the more Bob dug in with Matt, the more we were able to actually get out of Matt. And then this is actually, my wife introduced me to the 21-day fix, the home workouts, and the person that does the workout, she always says, like, you got to do the warm-up and you got to do the cool-down. And I think this is like, you got to keep this with you too, because having the prep beforehand and actually doing the review afterwards, it makes a big difference. You can't just like, let me just schedule 5 60-minute interviews like back to back to back to back. No, you have to have 120 minutes of time for one interview, of your time, not necessarily for the attendees' time. But overall, take action with this stuff. Like, you could, if you've never touched anything jobs to be done, like you could take action tomorrow if you really wanted to. And I think we're all in the same boat of like wanting to make better products, right? So, but I have some delighters for you. If you wanted to see the actual script that we used for Matt, and then we've adapted this several times, but it's not like you can download it. It's like 12 questions or something like that. The thing is, you start with questions, and then you definitely have to listen to what the person's saying, and you're going to go off a little bit. You're going to ask questions more in the moment too, and sort of let the conversation guide you. But this is the script we used. So feel free to have at it and just at least use it as a data point. Here's another bonus for you. You can listen to the whole interview, because one benefit of being the co-host of Rocket Ship, when we did this interview, I'm like, I should like release this to the world. Like, we should talk about it. Let's have Bob on the show and talk about it. And so there's actually multiple parts. I think there's 3 parts, which is the full interview's 2 parts. And then there's like a review episode too. So if you go to this link, you'll get you'll actually get, I think, the first part, and then it'll keep leading you to the next parts too. So you can listen to the interview. And the cool thing is there's not really a ton of full like jobs to be done interviews that are out there in audio form. There's some of them, but at least this will be another example. And then if you want the notes to industry, these are the notes. And actually, just on one hand, like, since I talked about them, it might be interesting just to see like, okay, well, what do these notes look like? But also just if you wanted this is sort of like I didn't get to attend industry, but let me get all the learnings from it. This is perfect for you too. So it's sort of like an ebook that just recaps everything that we learned last year. So you can have the notes. So 3 bonuses for everybody, but if you didn't get any of these links, you could email me afterwards and I will share them with you. And yeah, you could email me at mike@productcollective.com. I mentioned here to win the pass, email me, but you don't have to do that. You could keep tweeting, and that would be one way to do that. And then, yeah, it's my info. So if any of you, I know we're going to go Q&A now, but if any of you have more questions, feel free to come at me there too. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike, for a great talk. So we have plenty of time for Q&As, and we still have food if you want to stick around. And we're going to give the raffle prize after Q&A. The way Q&A works is you have to have a microphone. If you don't have a microphone, we have to capture for the video. So just raise your hand. We have 2 mic runners, Amit and Justina, and so they will give you, oh, you were up quick. So here you go. We'll give you the mic. There you go. Cool.
Thanks.
And I'll give you this one. Go ahead. Go for it.
Hey, thanks for coming. Enjoyed the talk.
Thanks.
Former resident of Cuyahoga County, so
Nice.
I've been there. I was wondering with these interviews, when you interview your kind of existing customer base, are you giving up any kind of like opportunity to capture the customers that, the potential customers, the prospects who, haven't come to your product yet? I'm in enterprise infrastructure, and that's what we're always thinking about.
Yeah, I think the answer is you do all of this. So I mentioned 3 interviews. The reality is we don't stop at 3 interviews. We stop for like, okay, some patterns emerged here and we can take action. So let's pause for a minute, take action on these things, put it to work. But then let's go back and let's interview, maybe the next cohort is people that aren't customers yet or people that left. Like the thing with this is like you could keep doing it over and over. I think to your point, if you did stop there and just said like, we did the notes, like, now that's it. You know, that would be a very big missed opportunity. But it's more like getting into a regular cadence. Like these interviews should almost be just a part of your normal day-to-day, not like an everyday thing, but like this is a regular recurring part of your job, or at least it can be as a product person. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Amazing
Thanks.
talk. I think the question is very close to the previous one. Any maybe specific tips on the interview which you are running on the person who never saw your product and doesn't even have an idea of this product to solve your problems? Because we actually struggled a lot on running those kinds of interviews.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that case, the objectives are just a little bit different. So the objectives might not be, hey, what is the push and pull to my product? But you might focus more on what is the struggling moment. Like what's their status quo and what's the struggling moment that they're experiencing? Or it could be that, you know, how have they tried to solve this before? It could be that they've hired another product to do the job to solve that problem, but it didn't work out as well. Or they have a problem that they're experiencing now because of, you know, sort of the problem now was a solution in the past, but it's like that's not working for them anymore. So I guess the answer is just you have to recalibrate your objectives. But I would, in that specific case, like focus on struggling moment more so than the pushes and pulls to your product, which, and you know, for struggling moment, they don't ever have to have even used your product to talk about their pain. So you could focus more on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think my question is very similar to both of them. Where I'm struggling is that I have a persona in mind for whom I want to do this. But I also have this fear that there might be a persona which I'm not reaching out to.
Yeah.
And how do I tap? That is my biggest struggle. From a growth perspective, that we are always looking for where do we grow more, right?
Yeah.
Am I losing an opportunity with people like a persona which is not already on my product? So will this help that situation, or this starts with an assumption that I'm going with a specific person?
Well, let me ask you this. So how many personas would you say like you're trying to capture feedback on?
So let me clarify my definition of persona also, like a person who's using typical for my product for a specific goal. But then I also feel that somebody else could use this product who's a completely different skill set and so on. But I don't know whether they will use it. And that's where I feel like, am I losing opportunity with this? Because I start with, in your case, you started with somebody who is interested in a product conference, and you never knew that person could be non-product manager, right?
Right.
Right. So
Right.
you kind of had a persona in your mind.
Well, that's actually a good point. Yeah, so with Matt, you're right. Like, we didn't know he was an onboarding lead, like, initially, because I don't even think he had listed his title when he had registered for his pass. So we knew his name and company, and so we could have dug in on LinkedIn or whatever, but, like, we just knew he came to industry. Onboarding leads that was not, like, an original group that we were reaching out to. So there are a couple things. I mean, one could be starting with customers today and digging in. You might figure out that some of your customers are actually a part of a persona that you never thought existed for your product. I guess if your product's so early stage, maybe that's not the case. But like for us, we have 1,000 people that come to the conference. There's going to be some people that are coming to our conference that are definitely not in active personas that we're reaching out to. So starting with current customers could uncover some personas. But I would say I don't personally think there's anything wrong with experimenting and going like, okay, this is a persona I think has possibilities to purchase our product, but they never have before. I don't think there's any, so these are 3 to 5 interviews, right? So like what's the time it might take you to do 3 to 5 interviews with this external persona? You'll only know after you go through them, like if it feels like there's actually value that was created or not. But I guess the opportunity cost of not doing it is like, you'll never know, right? But if we could say like, well, 3 to 5 interviews, I could probably find and interview people in a period of like a couple of weeks maybe you use that as an experiment. So those are the two things that come to mind, but I don't know.
I think it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's first? So in the ideal situation, especially with software, you can make many iterations and improvements and validate as you go along, so you avoid feeling like you're stuck with only 3 personas. With a conference, I'm curious, because you have essentially one shot a year to kind of get it right. There's so much buildup all around on that. I'm curious what you did after you went through this process to kind of validate that you're on the right path with a small sample size.
Yeah.
And what you learned after you thought you were on the right path between that and the actual conference. And did you have to adapt, or how did you incorporate the learning?
Yeah, I mean, so for us, and again, it's going to vary. For like some conferences, they might be just once a year. We have 2 editions, so we have the Europe edition and the global edition. So they're 6 months apart. So I could tell you, there's never a time, man. I kind of like am a little jealous of the old Mike when we had one a year, because I'm like, I have some breathing room from now for the next few months. But now it always feels like there's a conference around the corner for us, even though there's just 2. So for us, when we went through this, I remember the Europe conference was like 2 months away. So when we uncovered this, again, we're fortunate that this was something you could act on pretty quickly. Like to find a journalist, designer to do the notes, like at the end of the day, like you can solve all that pretty quickly. So it was an experiment. For us, we've kind of made it a goal that like every conference, there are experiments that we want to run and introduce new features, also take new features away. So I think 6 months apart is enough for us to, we can't do like everything. I mean, what it means is that every year we can only do kind of like, we have to pick what are the 3 new things we want to try out. Because if you were to come to a conference and it's like, there's 20 new things we're trying to do, and most new things fail. So if like there's 20 new things and 18 of those things aren't working, like that kind of sucks, right? So we don't want to do that, but we're kind of picking, like as we're learning from attendees, like, okay, what are 3 kind of experiments that we can run at the next conference? And is there anything that we've done in the past that we might be able to take away because it just wasn't really working well before and it's just going to be a distraction now? So I think for us, it sort of forces us to just get more specific about what we can try. And it also means like there are some experiments we probably could have run, but they weren't important enough to sort of make the list, then they end up not getting run. So I don't know if that's like the best way to approach it, but that's just kind of how we've approached it so far. I don't know if I answered all the parts of your question though. Was there any other part of it?
I think you hit it. The question over here kind of got me thinking, the fear of kind of losing out on the big thing, and how do you reconcile those 3 things? So you pick 3 things, you obviously have to pick, and there could have been 3 others that you didn't even uncover that could be amazing.
Yeah.
So like, do you just live with yourself with just
your
best?
So I will say, like, again, keep in mind, we're not doing, like I would say 3 interviews exist to sort of uncover some patterns, but the reality is we're doing like dozens of them like throughout the year. So those 3 things, like we're probably focusing more on things that we've heard not just in a cohort of 3, but like we've heard this come up over and over again. Like one example would be the first couple years of industry, it was all single track, right? And so everybody hears from the same speakers on stage, which I think is like a pretty good format when it's up to, say, a few hundred people plus. At that point, you have 500 people in the audience. That talk on stage might not even apply to most. So you start to break up the conference. I personally don't, like as a conference organizer, I don't like breaking things up earlier than that because it takes away energy, in my opinion. Like from like having these big main stage talks, now all of a sudden if it's rooms of like 10 people, it's just a personal preference kind of a thing, right? So we heard from Industry 2016, it was like, it was good, but like it ended, there wasn't enough interactivity, right, going on. And actually that one in particular, like it was great, but at the end it just sort of ended, it ended with a talk, and then the main message was like, now everybody go home, right? So like the thing is, we had like a happy hour that existed on that first night, but the second night, just the conference ended. So a couple things that we tried in 2017 was starting to break things up, like, but not everything, not like 2 days of of tracks where we have the first day where it's single track, and then the second day breaks up. And then we also started, it's simple, but we're like, well, do we have the happy hour the second day or the first day? And like, but if we do it the second, then we're like, why don't we just do it both days? Like, we just end on the happy hour. Like, who cares? So we did it both. So the point is, like, we didn't hear that just from a cohort of 3. Like, we heard those things over and over again. Whereas there were other things we're hearing that, like, maybe just coming up with a couple people. But at the end of the day, you're kind of going with your gut. Like, there's no thing that's going to tell you, like, this is the absolute thing you should be experimenting with. But that's, like, true for any software product too, right? So it's just taking in these points of feedback, but then at the end of the day, like, you're gonna need to make the call on what's important to you, and you have to be okay with some of those things failing. There's some things we've introduced that, like, we've taken away and we've done away with, and that's okay. As long as, like, hopefully a lot of our experiments end up working out and they end up like the notes where people like them. But yeah, I guess, like, if I were to shorten everything I just said to one thing, it's like, you take in the data points and you just use your, trust yourself a little bit to figure out what you think is best.
Hello, over here.
Hey.
So just for you said the importance of warming up and then to debriefing, can you give us some thoughts on how you structure that for effectiveness?
So with Bob, like, the way that we did it was fairly informal in that we had our script. So I had the objectives that we had already prepared with Bob, and then we had the script. And so before the call, we're like, okay, so who is Matt? I'm like, what's Matt's title? And I'm like, I actually don't, like, let's go to his LinkedIn reel. He's an onboarding lead. Like, so really it's just like looking at the script and the objectives, and we just kind of went back and forth. It's not like there was a structured, it was more like just preparing ourselves for what were going to be those initial sort of like warming up questions. And you'll see in the script, like, we had what those warming up questions were, but I'll say, like, the initial script, that's why I do think it's good to have one other person with you. So you might have your initial script, but in that warm up, you end up sort of refining that based on reviewing who this person is, what is their background, as best as you can figure that out. So that's the warm up. Then the cool down, or the review, I'm using the workout terms again now, but the review afterwards is really going back to those objectives, and it's like, okay, if we had hypotheses, did this person, like, can we validate or invalidate? And sometimes you have a conversation where it's like, you know what, we didn't pull out enough to go one way or the other here. So, like, this is sort of TBD, like, we can't really, like, add a data point there. But and then you kind of have so I have my script, and then I have a review. And the good thing about the review is then, like, anybody else in my company, which is a company of 3, like, anybody else then can access that and look at it later on. But again, like, if you give yourself 30 minutes for both of those, it's usually plenty of time. You might not even need all 30 minutes, but I think the nice thing about it is, like, let's just say you really needed 15. And then you're sitting there and it's like, all right, well, we still have 15 minutes. Inevitably what happens is, like, a couple minutes go on and it's like, oh, wait, one more thing. Like, and sometimes that one more thing, like, is an important thing. So giving yourself a little bit more time, I think, is better than, like, even though we're all busy, giving yourself more time is a little bit better than not enough.
Hi,
Hey.
Kamal here, and thanks for the presentation. It's great. I think it was a great challenge that you had trying to improve the conference. I was wondering, what if hypothetically you had a different challenge? Let's say you didn't have a conference, and let's say there's no other product conference yet, and you're trying to determine if there is any demand, if there's any need, if there's a market for this kind of a conference. You had an idea, so it's like a startup for you, right?
Yeah.
How do you go about understanding that, determining that if there is a market, and what kind of people would you talk to in that case?
Yeah, I mean, and by the way, like, that's the moment that I love. So my whole career has always been in very early stage startups. So I was like employee number 1 at a company that grew, when I left it 6 years later, it was like 120 people. And then I had a startup of my own that I had launched. And, like, so I love that startup phase, but it's also the most confusing stage of any too. So I think the positive is that you kind of have a lot of options you could go with. And I still think you could still treat a job speed done interview as we were doing here before. The difference would be maybe can't focus as much on pushes and pulls to like a similar product as you. Yeah, I mean, you could pick, let's just say, another product that might be comparable, because it's probably very likely that even if there's not a product that you've launched yet, there's probably a comparable product of some sort. Like, it might not have all the same features and functions, but like, no new product is like, I mean, there are many that are like so unique, but like the reality is, like, if you were to say like, well, what does this really compete with? It might not look and feel the same, but it's probably competing with something. So you could look for customers of that particular product too. I think the challenge though is like, you're going to have probably a lot more of these interviews because you're going to uncover things that a cohort of 3 isn't going to give you the answers to like solve a specific problem of, should we start this company or not? Or should we launch this product for the very first time or not? So I think you could still do the same sort of things. My opinion though is you're probably going to have to do more of them, and you probably have to do them with different types of, again, going back to like different types of personas and such. And it's going to be harder, but it might also be more interesting to you too.
Thanks.
Another question around like, how do you select who do you talk to? Because you said come up with a hypothesis and then select someone who's not an outlier. So doesn't that just, you're kind of selecting who you're talking to based on your hypotheses, which might mean you're taking out outliers who may not be your outliers?
Maybe. I mean, it's definitely possible for sure. For us though, I mean, like when I meant not an outlier, it's sort of at the extreme. So Matt was an onboarding lead. Really, like we weren't trying to target onboarding leads, but he was still, like I still consider people in onboarding, even customer success, definitely UX, like we're still in the product family at least. When I think of an outlier, at least for our conference, I'm just gonna use ourselves as an example. I'm talking about like a business professor, or it might be like we've had somebody come that, and it's more of an outlier than Matt for sure. She managed the restaurant experience of a fast food chain. It had nothing to do with the website or the app or anything like that. So, but she's like, my product, have you ever been to the restaurant? You walk in, that's my product. It's like, that's more of an outlier to us than like onboarding lead, you're still touching product in some way. But you're right. I mean, if we're sort of making an assumption about who outliers are, I think if you could just try to keep it so that it's not such an extreme example, the better off you are. I also will say, like, even if we talk to that person, I guess the worst case scenario is if you did talk to somebody that was an outlier, you might uncover things that are still helpful. It just, there might not be as useful nuggets as somebody else, and it's 60 minutes or 120 minutes of time. So that's the only, I guess, downside of talking to outliers. So, but I do think we probably know our products well enough to know like what are the, I'm not talking about like what are the like 20% outliers. It's more like stay away from like the 1% outliers on both extremes. Something to think about.
I guess that ties back to, well, 3 is good, but you'd still want to
Yeah.
continue talking until you get friends.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like I always try to get 5 because I'm just used to people canceling on me. But that's a good point too. It's like there's definitely gonna be interviews you do, and it might not be a cohort of 3, but there's gonna be interviews you do where it's like, I don't know if we got enough out of that. Like, I don't know if anything came out of that. Sometimes I'll do that, like I'm reviewing my notes and I'm like, I just don't have like, what's that useful aha? Then again, like the more interviews you do, what didn't seem like a useful aha becomes one later because you start to see those patterns emerge. So it just might mean that person might have useful things for you, but after you're doing more and more interviews.
One more question. How would you recommend to prepare people for such a weird interview? Like so that they react in a proper way and not confused, like, why are you asking me that? Like, how is that related?
I think being upfront with them, first of all, like asking for a full 60 minutes is good so that they're expecting that. But then before the interview starts, you say like, okay, what we're really trying to do is understand more about your experience here. And we're kind of treating this like we're documentary filmmakers. So if we ask you, like we're gonna ask you background questions and but treat it like as if we're documentary filmmakers. And first of all, it kind of seems cool that way. Like then, like I know if I was told that, I'm like, okay, that's kind of, that's interesting. But like it gives you permission to do things that are differently than how you might have approached an interview before. So that's how we did it.
Yeah.
So I'm a little confused about the jobs to be done interviews and user interviews that UX researchers they generally do. Because to me, it looks like the jobs to be done interviews, the framework, you already have those three things that you're going to look at. And UX, when UX researchers they do user interviews, they also look like also want to explore and understand how people their product experiences and how they use it, why they use it, their pain points and motivations, their goals and needs, lots of things. So what are your opinions about, like, did you see the differences? Like how, in what situation you're going to use jobs to be done interviews and in what situation you are going to do, like say, the UX researcher they do user interview?
Yeah, I'm going to give you the Mike Belsito answer, not the like Bob Nesta or Tony Ulwick answer, because they're the experts. So I'm not an expert. I'm just a product person that's trying this stuff out. And I'm also not a UX expert, but like I've done enough user interviews beforehand to know where you're coming from. My take is that a jobs to be done interview is a user interview. It's a form of a user interview, right? Like, so there might be specific reasons you might do one user interview versus another. So this is just a specific use case. Depending on, like, again, if you were to say, like, hey, I just did this user interview and I was specifically looking for the struggling moment, the push and the pull, the anxiety, the inertia. If you were doing all that in a user interview, it was a jobs to be done interview. Like, that would be my take on it. So you might have already done them, but just like called them something different. But there's some people that might do a user interview. I know because I've done this before. Like I feel like I've done user interviews before, but I wasn't looking for those specific components. Like I was kind of going through it in a different mindset. That's the difference. So if you're going through it looking for those specific things, it could be the same. But if you're not looking for those things, that just might be the difference. That's the Mike Belsito answer anyway.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. I have a question. So when you look at 3 or 4 things that you want to improve in the conference, does that sometimes restrict you from doing something very radical because you're always looking at improving things, but not necessarily doing something that you probably never thought of?
I'm glad you brought that up. So like one of the things that has come up in some of these interviews isn't like for some attendees that we're talking to, we've noticed they're starting to bring up things that aren't conferences at all. So like when we're digging in with them, like again, somebody might be in the same boat as Matt as wanting to level up their skills. It's like, okay, well, how like what have you done to date? And attending a conference might be one of those things, but it also might be attending a standalone workshop. It might be subscribing to podcasts or buying books or like just dedicating brain time that maybe doesn't even cost a dime, but it costs that person's time. And so we've started, and this goes back to, again, one of the 3 things you could get out of is like finding new channels. There are some new channels we're starting to explore that we haven't like rolled out, but that have nothing to do with a conference at all. So I think if your mindset was just specific, like for us, we're trying to keep our mindset as how can we solve these problems for our customers? And it just happens that like we have a conference as the conduit to do that today. And so a lot of the results are conference focused. But when we've started hearing some of these other problems and seeing that some of their like potential solutions weren't conference focused, like so the same question exists for us. How do we solve this problem for them? It might not be through a conference. So I think it's just, this is like the same for when I was back in software. It's like we have a current product, but when's the moment that you decide to launch a brand new product altogether? It's just you have to keep your mind open to doing that. I know I've also been in a boat where we're just so focused on the product that we were managing that like we did miss opportunities on launching new products that our competitors ended up launching. So it's just, I do think you just have to keep your mindset to being open to doing both of those things, and we're trying to do that now.
Hi, Mike.
Hey, oh, there you are.
Very nice presentation.
Thank you.
Actually, I like you come from Cleveland because I graduated from Case Western.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, very nice.
Woohoo!
So,
Go Spartans.
Yeah, go. So I graduated from Weatherhead School of Management.
When did you attend there?
From 2012 to 2015.
All right. I was there 2003 to 2005. So I missed you.
Yeah. So I really love the divider, the notes idea. But have you had a concern that when you start to give away notes to attendees, the number of actual attendees to a conference would be reduced? Since some small startups would think, okay, anyways, the people who attend the conference will bring back notes, so they may send less people to the conference in terms of saving budget. So have you had the concerns?
You know, there's always kind of, I mean, and similar to the notes, like we kind of asked ourselves that same question of like, should we release the talks on YouTube or something? You know, because it's like, well, gosh, once the talks are out there on YouTube, like you could just not come to the conference because you subscribe to our YouTube channel. But the thing is, when we go back to like, why do people ultimately come? They are coming to, yes, trying to learn things, but part of like answering that question, am I doing this right, isn't just hearing the talk on stage. It's then being able to like go up to Dan afterwards and be like, hey, Dan, I read your book, like, but like really, like, what do you do? You know, like, so that was kind of why we thought, you know what, let's put this out there. We thought about it, but we didn't have that fear. And I actually think it's, again, I don't know, right? But I believe, based on like feedback we've gotten, it actually has helped us get more people to the conference, because sometimes people will think of like, well, what else could I do with this time? I might go to another conference. Well, gosh, this is something that I can't get at another conference, or you know, what have you. I think there's always a fear of it at first, but you try it and kind of see what happens. And with the reaction we got that first year in Europe, it was just positive enough where we felt like that outweighed any sort of potential people not coming because of the notes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I love the concept of the notes. Was there more than one Kevin running around for the various tracks, or how did that work out?
There was a good question. So there's only one Kevin. So this was back when Europe is still single track. But this year, we're actually, so last year was single track, and what we did was the notes was every main stage talk. So day one's all single track, and then day two begins and ends with main stage talks. And then it breaks up into 3 experiences, which are breakout talks, fireside chats, or small group discussions. So the journalists attended the breakout talk. So basically all of the talks. Last year they didn't attend the fireside chats. This year we'll probably have 2 people. So there's 24 different small group discussions. So it won't be the discussions, but it'll at least be the fireside chats and the talks too. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Got 2 mics, real?
All right, that was good.
That was good. A lot of questions. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's give Mike a warm round of applause here.